A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And coming to her, the angel said, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you." But Mary was greatly troubled at what was said, and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. One of my favorite feasts during the month of March is the beautiful feast of the Annunciation. Now, you know there are hundreds of paintings that depict this event in Mary's life. One that I love is not a painting, but actually it's a sketch by Rembrandt. And in this sketch, we see Gabriel, the archangel, trying to hold Mary up as she's about to fall from her chair. The angel, as we know, has just greeted her with "Hail," or rejoice. And that was okay. So far, so good. It was the rest that got Mary. You have found favor with God. In those days, as in these, the term to find favor with God was definitely not always something necessarily to rejoice over. To be sure, to find favor with God meant that God had noticed you and loved you deeply. Now that was a plus. But it also implied that God had a great task for you. A task that sometimes, maybe often, meant sacrifice and suffering. Mary knew that. No wonder she swooned and had to be quickly reassured by the Archangel Gabriel. Do not be afraid. But she was afraid. And it wasn't long after that her fears were confirmed, when old Simeon in the temple prophesied that a sword would pierce her heart. So Mary's yes to the angel was sincere, but a little hesitant, because it was given at a great price. And that's where her greatness lies. I mean, we tend to romanticize Mary as having an open, spontaneous, and generous heart, singing out her yes almost immediately. It was indeed generous, but only because her yes was tinged with fear and laced with trust. She had found favor, and she said yes, though surely her next thought had to be, what is this going to entail? Finding favor with God is often a mixed blessing. So I make this point just to remind you that at one time, perhaps long ago, each of us has had his or her own Annunciation. We call that Annunciation our baptism, when we, having found favor with God, were called, chosen. The fact is, to say yes to the mighty and wonderful God, it's both liberating and fearful. But amazingly, we treat it so lightly. Today, because familiarity breeds contempt, the call and the response of our baptism is taken so easily and almost casually. To have been found with God's favor is a precious treasure, but its ramification should make us, like Mary, a little afraid, and yet at the same time excited with the challenge of making a difference in this world if we are true to our yes. A rather simple example from a young man in his early 30s whom I know. He said to me one day, "I'm looking for another job." "Really?" I replied. "I thought you were happy with the one you have." "Well," he said, "I was happy enough." And then he went on. "But yesterday my boss came in and said to me, 'Boy, you won't believe what I got yesterday.'" And then he pulled out a picture of a car, a Lexus. And he plopped that picture down in front of me and said, "Young man, if you keep your nose to the grindstone, one day you can get to be like me." And he quickly turned and left my office. And those words, they stuck in my head, Father. I could hear him say, "Young man, if you keep at it, you will be like me." And I thought to myself, great, one day I'll have a no greater point to my life than to get some car and think that it gives me a life worth living. Father, I guess I ought to be glad that my boss said this to me. For me, it was an awakening. He was right. It was an awakening basically to the meaning of his baptismal yes. And it was such an awakening that he actually left that job and got a different one. Let me give you a parallel story. A woman says to me, "I grew up in Guatemala, and whenever it rained, it was also cold. So when I would come back from school at the end of a rainy day, my mother would be there waiting for me with a cup of hot chocolate. I always appreciated it, though I pretty much after a while took it for granted. That is, until I moved away from home. And after being away 5 years, I went back to visit. And believe it or not, it was cold and rainy when I landed at the airport. I got off the plane, and there was my mom waiting for me with a huge smile and a cup of hot chocolate. Now I live in New York, and whenever it rains, I think of that special combination of sweetness and warmth, and I relive my mother's generosity to me and her care by always having a cup of hot chocolate on a rainy day. So looking past the sentimentality of her story, we affirm, yes, that's really what mothers do. This kind of natural generosity and love is just who they are. It kind of goes with the territory. And yet it should be the same with us as Christians. The moral, ethical life should be a natural thing that we Christians just do, even though it's a bit crazy and a bit scary because it requires, out of love for Jesus, often being somewhat contradictory or countercultural with all the ridicule and the rejection, the hoots and the hurts that being countercultural brings. So what's the bottom line of the Annunciation for us? I think the bottom of the Annunciation scene is that in finding favor with God, Mary was at a crossroads. In that beautiful song that she sings to her cousin Elizabeth called the Magnificat, she announces loud and clear, "He who is mighty has done great things for me." But she also knew she would have to do great things for God. In virtue of our baptism, my brothers and sisters, in virtue of our call, so it is with us. God will always do great things for us. But the other part of that equation is, and God is looking forward to us doing great things for Him.